everyone, welcome back. Happy Monday. It's another week of our read-along together of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. And in fact, we are just beginning week number 9 of our read-along together of this book. And let's see, today we'll read 2 chapters, but of course we're going to start out with a lovely beverage, because what better way to start off a nice week of reading than with a lovely glass of tea. And I decided that today's tea was going to be our orange mango loose leaf tea, which is yummy. It has orange slices, mango cubes, pineapple, safflower, marigold blossoms, and strawberries. It really feels like it should just be dried fruit that you're getting to eat, but instead it becomes a fabulous tea. So let's go ahead and pour that out and enjoy. I love the color on this one. It's a really bright yellow with just a hint of orange to it. It's so pretty. That one's fabulous. It has just a nice gentle sweetness to it. Okay, and let's see. I guess we'll go ahead and get started talking. I don't see anyone else here yet but me. Okay, so maybe somebody else will come along soon. If not, I hope you're enjoying this recording afterwards. So let's see. Yesterday was Sunday, but on Friday, the last day that we read together, we read one chapter. And chapter 73 was entitled The Promise. And it was actually interesting because there were several promises made in the course of that chapter. It began with Valentine de Villefort talking with Maximilien Morel in the garden. Hi, Helen. It's good to see you here. I really thought I was going to be alone today. So I'm glad you could join me. Okay, sorry. We're just recapping on chapter 73, The Promise. In that one, it began with Valentine talking with Maximilien Morel. And basically, Valentine was letting Maximilien know, or letting Maximilien know about her grandmother being ill, her believing indeed that she was dying, and also that her grandfather had passed away, and in fact both of her grandparents had been united in wanting Valentine's marriage to Franz d'Epinay to happen with as much haste as could be, and especially now that the grandmother, Madame de Saint-Méran, believes that she's dying, she would like to see her granddaughter married off before she goes. And so Valentine is very unhappy about this because she loves Maximilien Morel, and the two of them are talking, and eventually Valentine admits basically that she does love Maximilien Morel and that she does not want to do her daughterly and granddaughterly duty of marrying Franz d'Epinay, and that she will find a way to flee before the marriage contract is signed with Franz d'Epinay, and that she will follow her heart and elope with Maximilien Morel. So that is the plan, the promise that she makes to him. However, the next day, when he goes to meet her that evening, he's ready to meet her in the garden and for them to go off together. She doesn't show up. And what we eventually learn, he overhears a conversation between the doctor and Monsieur de Villefort as they exit via the garden. He hears them basically saying that Madame de Saint-Méran has died, and that so the house is in tumult. And so he briefly has a moment, and he's embarrassed of himself, he has this brief moment of thinking, oh good, because there was a death in the family, the wedding will be postponed again. But no, the grandmother had been very adamant that she wanted to see her granddaughter wed, so if anything, it would continue to hasten that wedding. And so they're talking, though, about this, and he overhears the doctor telling Monsieur de Villefort that he has suspicions that the grandmother's death may not have been of natural causes. In fact, that it seems consistent with the symptoms you might see from poisoning by this medicine called, I believe it was Bursine, which is something that Monsieur Noirtier takes. And again, because it's sort of like that concept that the Count of Monte Cristo had talked about before, that things in moderation can be a medicine, but in excess can be a poison. And so this medicine that Monsieur Noirtier takes, it could also be the same or very similar to what may have poisoned Madame de Saint-Méran. So they talk about this, and again, the doctor says, I know you're a magistrate, you're a judge, and so I'm telling you this as a friend right now because I'm worried that there might be something suspicious going on. Watch your family, watch your household, protect their safety. But for now, I'm just giving you this advice. I'm not bringing it to you in your capacity as a judge to prosecute this. So again, the doctor and Monsieur de Villefort have discussed the possibility of Madame de Saint-Méran having been murdered via poison. Then, after they leave the garden, Maximilien continues into the house because at this point, he just needs to see Valentine. They were supposed to elope tonight. Something has gone really wrong. He needs to see her. So he goes in, he finds her in the house, and the two of them are trying to figure out a way where they can leave And basically she says, let's go through my grandfather's room, and I've always wanted to introduce you to my grandfather anyway because I love him so much. So she brings Maximilian in to meet her grandfather, and the grandfather is able to converse with Maximilian using his eyes because Valentine has taught him that method. And so Maximilian tells the grandfather, Monsieur de Noirtier, that he wants to marry Valentine. He tells him that, who he is, what his prospects are, who his father was an honest man, and that he loves Valentine and he wants to wed her. And he basically tells the grandfather, there's a few things I could do. I could challenge him to a duel, Franz d'Epinay. I could, we could just, we could run off together. We could do these things. And the grandfather's like, no, I have a plan. I will stop this wedding. And, again, Maximilian Morel is kind of stunned at how this could be possible. How Monsieur Noirtier, paralyzed, confined to his bed, able to communicate only with his eyes and a little bit of facial expression, how is he going to stop this marriage contract from being signed? But Monsieur Noirtier is very, very solemn and serious and firm about it, that he will stop this marriage. And so Maximilian then he swears on his honor that he will wait, the conclusion that Monsieur Noirtier is going to enact, and that he will leave without seeing Mademoiselle Valentine again. And then he also embraces Monsieur Noirtier as a grandfather, whom he finally has in the family. And so that is the end of that chapter. We had promises of Valentine and Morel to wed each other. And we had a very amazing promise from the doctor that he would not reveal the secret about the possibility of Madame de Saint-Méran having been poisoned. And we also had, most notably, the promise of Monsieur Noirtier that he would stop the wedding of his granddaughter Valentine and Franz d'Epinay. So in today's readings, chapters 74 and 75, we will learn how Monsieur Noirtier plans on stopping that wedding. Good stuff. And again, as I mentioned before too, if you're reading along in the Project Gutenberg edition, we are beginning today volume 4 of 5 of the Count of Monte Cristo. If you're in a different edition, you may not have it broken apart into the volumes like this. I assume that they did it, Routledge and Sons, when they published this back in 1888, because it is such a huge book that they needed to print it in 5 separate volumes because they didn't have a printing press big enough or a binding big enough for one. This is a really good tea. For anyone who came in a little late, it's the orange mango. If you're having something particularly fabulous today, I'd love to hear what it is. Go ahead and comment on that. And let's go ahead and start in with our readings today, chapters 74 and 75. Oh, by the way, I realized too, I've been falling behind on posting the drawings from this edition into our onto our page. I'll go ahead and try to get caught up with that soon. I am sorry about that. So let's go ahead and continue today with chapters 74 and 75. 74 is entitled The Villefort Family Vault. 2 days after, a considerable crowd was assembled towards 10 o'clock in the morning around the door of Monsieur de Villefort's house, and a long file of mourning coaches and private carriages extended along the Faubourg Saint-Honoré and the Rue de la Pépinière. Among them was one of a very singular form, which appeared to have come from a distance. It was a kind of covered wagon, painted black, and was one of the first to arrive. Inquiry was made, and it was ascertained that, by a strange coincidence, this carriage contained the corpse of the Marquis de Saint-Méran, and that those who had come thinking to attend one funeral would follow 2. Their number was great. The Marquis de Saint-Méran, one of the most zealous and faithful dignitaries of Louis XVIII and King Charles X, had preserved a great number of friends, and these, added to the personages whom the usages of society gave Villefort a claim on, formed a considerable body. Due information was given to the authorities, and permission obtained that the 2 funerals should take place at the same time. A second hearse, decked with the same funereal pomp, was brought to Monsieur de Villefort's door, and the coffin removed into it from the post-wagon. The 2 bodies were to be interred in the cemetery of Père Lachaise, where Monsieur de Villefort had long since had a tomb prepared for the reception of his family. The remains of poor Renée were already deposited there, and now, after 10 years of separation, her father and mother were to be reunited with her. The Parisians, always curious, always affected by funereal display, looked on with religious silence while the splendid procession accompanied to their last abode two of the number of the old aristocracy, the greatest protectors of commerce and sincere devotees to their principles. In one of the morning coaches, Beauchamp, Debray, and Chateau Renaud were talking of the very sudden death of the Marchioness. "I saw Madame de Saint-Méran only last year at Marseille, when I was coming back from Algiers," said Chateau Renaud. "She looked like a woman destined to live to be 100 years old, from her apparent sound health and great activity of mind and body. How old was she?" "Franz assured me," replied Albert, "that she was 66 years old. But she has not died of old age, but of grief. It appears that since the death of the Marquis, which affected her very deeply, she has not completely recovered her reason." "But of what disease, then, did she die?" asked Debray. "It is said to have been a congestion of the brain, or apoplexy, which is the same thing, is it not?" "Nearly." "It is difficult to believe that it was apoplexy," said Beauchamp. "Madame de Saint-Méran, whom I once saw, was short, of slender form, and of a much more nervous than sanguine temperament. Grief could hardly produce apoplexy in such a constitution as that of Madame de Saint-Méran." "At any rate," said Albert, "whatever disease or doctor may have killed her, Monsieur de Villefort, or rather Mademoiselle Valentine, or still rather our friend Franz, inherits a magnificent fortune, amounting, I believe, to 80,000 livres per annum. And this fortune will be doubled at the death of the old Jacobin, Noirtier." "That is a tenacious old grandfather," said Beauchamp. "Tenacem propiciti virum. I think he must have made an agreement with death to outlive all his heirs, and he appears likely to succeed. He resembles the old conventionalist of '93, who said to Napoleon in 1814, 'You bend because your empire is a young stem, weakened by rapid growth. Take the Republic for a tutor. Let us return with renewed strength to the battlefield, and I promise you 500,000 soldiers, another Marengo, and a second Austerlitz. Ideas do not become extinct, sire. They slumber sometimes, but only revive the stronger before they sleep entirely.'" "Ideas and men appeared the same to him," said Albert. "One thing only puzzles me, namely, how Franz d'Épinay will like a grandfather who cannot be separated from his wife. But where is Franz?" "In the first carriage, with Monsieur de Villefort, who considers him already as one of the family." Such was the conversation in almost all the carriages. These two sudden deaths, so quickly following each other, astonished everyone, but no one suspected the terrible secret which Monsieur d'Avrigny had communicated in his nocturnal walk to Monsieur de Villefort. They arrived in about an hour at the cemetery. The weather was mild but dull, and in harmony with the funeral ceremony. Among the groups which flocked towards the family vault, Chateau Renaud recognized Morel, who had come alone in a cabriolet and walked silently along the path bordered with yew trees. "You here?" said Chateau Renaud, passing his arms through the young captain's. "Are you a friend of Villefort's? How is it that I have never met you at his house? "I am no acquaintance of Monsieur de Villefort's," answered Morel, "but I was of Madame de Saint-Méran." Albert came up to them at this moment with Franz. "The time and place are but ill-suited for an introduction," said Albert, "but we are not superstitious. Monsieur Morel, allow me to present to you Monsieur Franz d'Épinay, a delightful traveling companion with whom I made the tour of Italy. My dear Franz, Monsieur Maximilian Morel, an excellent friend I have acquired in your absence, and whose name you will hear me mention every time I make an allusion to affection, wit, or amiability." Morel hesitated for a moment. He feared it would be hypocritical to accost in a friendly manner the man whom he was tacitly opposing. But his oath and the gravity of the circumstances recurred to his memory. He struggled to conceal his emotion and bowed to Franz. "Mademoiselle de Villefort is in deep sorrow, is she not?" said Debray to Franz. "Extremely," replied he. "She looked so pale this morning, I scarcely knew her." These apparently simple words pierced Morel to the heart. This man had seen Valentine and spoken to her. The young and high-spirited officer required all his strength of mind to resist breaking his oath. He took the arm of Chateau Renaud and turned towards the vault where the attendants had already placed the 2 coffins. "This is a magnificent habitation," said Beauchamp, looking towards the mausoleum. "A summer and winter palace. You will in turn enter it, my dear Epinay, for you will soon be numbered as one of the family. I, as a philosopher, should like a little country house, a cottage down there under the trees, without so many freestones over my poor body. In dying, I will say to those around me what Voltaire wrote to Piron, 'Eo rus,' and all will be over. But come, Franz, take courage. Your wife is an heiress." "Indeed, Beauchamp, you are unbearable. Politics has made you laugh at everything, and political men have made you disbelieve everything. But when you have the honor of associating with ordinary men, and the pleasure of leaving politics for a moment, try to find your affectionate heart, which you leave with your stick when you go to the chamber." "But tell me," said Beauchamp, "what is life? Is it not a halt in death's anteroom?" "I am prejudiced against Beauchamp," said Albert, drawing Franz away and leaving the former to finish his philosophical dissertation with Debray. The Villefort vault formed a square of white stones about 20 feet high. An interior partition separated the 2 families, and each apartment had its entrance door. Here were not, as in other tombs, ignoble drawers, one above another, where thrift bestows its dead and labels them like specimens in a museum. All that was visible within the bronze gates was a gloomy-looking room, separated by a wall from the vault itself. The 2 doors before mentioned were in the middle of this wall, and enclosed the Villefort and Saint-Méran coffins. There grief might freely expend itself without being disturbed by the trifling loungers who came from a picnic party to visit Père Lachaise, or by lovers who make it their rendezvous. The 2 coffins were placed on trestles previously prepared for their reception in the right-hand crypt belonging to the Saint-Méran family. Villefort, Franz, and a few near relatives alone entered the sanctuary. As the religious ceremonies had all been performed at the door, and there was no address given, the party all separated. Chateau Renaud, Albert, and Morel went one way, and Debray and Beauchamp the other. Franz remained with Monsieur de Villefort at the gate of the cemetery. Morel made an excuse to wait. He saw Franz and Monsieur de Villefort get into the same mourning coach, and thought this meeting foreboded evil. He then returned to Paris, and although in the same carriage with Chateau Renaud and Albert, he did not hear one word of their conversation. As Franz was about to take leave of Monsieur de Villefort, "When shall I see you again?" said the latter. "At what time you please, sir," replied Franz. "As soon as possible." "I am at your command, sir. Shall we return together?" "If not unpleasant to you." "On the contrary, I shall feel much pleasure." Thus the future father and son-in-law stepped into the same carriage, and Morel, seeing them pass, became uneasy. Villefort and Franz returned to the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. The procureur, without going to see either his wife or his daughter, went at once to his study, and, offering the young man a chair, "Monsieur d'Épinay," said he, "allow me to remind you at this moment, which is perhaps not so ill-chosen as at first sight may appear, for obedience to the wishes of the departed is the first offering which should be made at their tomb. Allow me then to remind you of the wish expressed by Madame de Saint-Méran on her deathbed, that Valentine's wedding might not be deferred. You know the affairs of the deceased are in perfect order, and her will bequeaths to Valentine the entire property of the Saint-Méran family. The notary showed me the documents yesterday, which will enable us to draw up the contract immediately. You may call on the notary, Monsieur Deschamps, Place Beauvau, Faubourg Saint-Honoré, and you have my authority to inspect those deeds." "Sir," replied Monsieur d'Épinay, "it is not, perhaps, the moment for Mademoiselle Valentine, who is in deep distress, to think of a husband. Indeed, I fear Valentine will have no greater pleasure than that of fulfilling her grandmother's last injunctions. There will be no obstacle from that quarter, I assure you." "In that case," replied Franz, "as I shall raise none, you may make arrangements when you please. I have pledged my word, and shall feel pleasure and happiness in adhering to it." "Then," said Villefort, Nothing further is required. The contract was to have been signed 3 days since. We shall find it all ready and can sign it today." "But the mourning," said Franz, hesitating. "Don't be uneasy on that score," replied Villefort. "No ceremony will be neglected in my house. Mademoiselle de Villefort may retire during the prescribed 3 months to her estate of Saint-Méran. I say hers, for she inherits it today. There, after a few days, if you like, the civil marriage shall be celebrated without pomp or ceremony. Madame de Saint-Méran wished her daughter should be married there. When that is over, you, sir, can return to Paris, while your wife passes the time of her mourning with her mother-in-law." "As you please, sir," said Franz. "Then," replied Monsieur de Villefort, "have the kindness to wait half an hour. Valentine shall come down into the drawing-room. I will send for Monsieur Deschamps. We will read and sign the contract before we separate, and this evening Madame de Villefort shall accompany Valentine to her estate, where we will rejoin them in a week." "Sir," said Franz, "I have one request to make." "What is it?" "I wish Albert—" Sorry about that. A call was trying to come in. Let's go back a line. "Sir," said Franz, "I have one request to make." "What is it?" "I wish Albert de Morcerf and Raoul de Château to be present at this signature. You know they are my witnesses." "Half an hour will suffice to apprise them. Will you go for them yourself, or shall you send?" "I prefer going, sir." "I shall expect you then in half an hour, Baron, and Valentine will be ready." Franz bowed and left the room. Scarcely had the door closed when Monsieur de Villefort sent to tell Valentine to be ready in the drawing-room in half an hour, as he expected the notary and Monsieur d'Épinay and his witnesses. Sorry about that. Okay, sorry, another call is coming in, so let's go back again a line. Sorry. Franz bowed and left the room. Scarcely had the door closed when Monsieur de Villefort sent to tell Valentine to be ready in the drawing-room in half an hour, as he expected the notary and Monsieur d'Épinay and his witnesses. The news caused a great sensation throughout the house. Madame de Villefort would not believe it, and Valentine was thunderstruck. She looked around for help and would have gone down to her grandfather's room, but on the stairs she met Monsieur de Villefort, who took her arm and led her into the drawing-room. In the anteroom, Valentine met Barrois and looked despairingly at the old servant. A moment later, Madame de Villefort entered the drawing-room with her little Edward. It was apparent that she shared the grief of the family, for she was pale and looked fatigued. She sat down, took Edward on her knees, and from time to time pressed this child, on whom her affection seemed centered almost convulsively to her bosom. 2 carriages were soon heard to enter the courtyard. One was the notary's, the other that of Franz and his friends. In a moment the whole party was assembled. Valentine was so pale one might trace the blue veins from her temples, round her eyes and down her cheeks. Franz was deeply affected. Château Renaud and Albert looked at each other with amazement. The ceremony which was just concluded had not appeared more sorrowful than did that which was about to begin. Madame de Villefort had placed herself in the shadow behind a velvet curtain, and as she constantly bent over her child, it was difficult to read the expression of her face. Monsieur de Villefort was, as usual, unmoved. The notary, after having, according to the customary method, arranged the papers on the table, taken his place in an armchair, and raised his spectacles, turned towards Franz. "Are you Monsieur Franz de Quesnel, Baron d'Épinay?" asked he, although he knew it perfectly. "Yes, sir," replied Franz. The notary bowed. "I have, then, to inform you, sir, at the request of Monsieur de Villefort, that your projected marriage with Mademoiselle de Villefort has changed the feeling of Monsieur Noirtier towards his grandchild, and that he disinherits her entirely of the fortune he would have left her. Let me hasten to add," continued he, "that the testator, having only the right to alienate a part of his fortune, and having alienated it all, the will not bear scrutiny, and is declared null and void." "Yes," said Villefort, "but I warn Monsieur d'Épinay that during my lifetime my father's will shall never be questioned, my position forbidding any doubt to be entertained." "Sir," said Franz, "I regret much that such a question has been raised in the presence of Mademoiselle Valentine. I have never inquired the amount of her fortune, which, however limited it may be, exceeds mine. My family has sought consideration in this alliance with Monsieur de Villefort. All I seek is happiness." Valentine imperceptibly thanked him, while 2 silent tears rolled down her cheeks. "Besides, sir," said Villefort, addressing himself to his future son-in-law, "accepting the loss of a portion of your hopes, this unexpected will need not personally wound you. Monsieur Noirtier's weakness of mind sufficiently explains it. It is not because Mademoiselle Valentine is going to marry you that he is angry, but because she will marry. A union with any other would have caused him the same sorrow. Old age is selfish, sir, and Mademoiselle de Villefort has been a faithful companion to Monsieur Noirtier, which she cannot be when she becomes the Baroness d'Épinay. My father's melancholy state prevents our speaking to him on any subjects which the weakness of his mind would incapacitate him from understanding, and I am perfectly convinced that at the present time, although he knows that his granddaughter is going to be married, Monsieur Noirtier has even forgotten the name of his intended grandson." Monsieur de Villefort had scarcely said this when the door opened and Barrois appeared. "Gentlemen," said he, in a tone strangely firm for a servant speaking to his masters under such solemn circumstances, "Gentlemen, Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort wishes to speak immediately to Monsieur Franz de Quesnel, Baron d'Épinay." He, as well as the notary, that there might be no mistake in the person, gave all his titles to the bridegroom-elect. Villefort started. Mademoiselle de Villefort let her son slip from her knees. Valentine rose pale and dumb as a statue. Albert and Chateau Renaud exchanged a second look, more full of amazement than the first. The notary looked at Villefort. "It is impossible," said the procureur. "Monsieur d'Épinay cannot leave the drawing-room at present." "It is at this moment," replied Barrois with the same firmness, "that Monsieur Noirtier, my master, wishes to speak on important subjects to Monsieur Franz d'Épinay." "Grandpapa Noirtier can speak now, then," said Grandpapa Noirtier can speak now, then," said Edward with his habitual quickness. However, his remark did not make Madame de Villefort even smile, so much was every mind engaged, and so solemn was the situation. "Tell Monsieur Noirtier," resumed Villefort, "that what he demands is impossible." "Then Monsieur Noirtier gives notice to these gentlemen," replied Barrois, "that he will give orders to be carried to the drawing-room." Astonishment was at its height. Something like a smile was perceptible on Madame de Villefort's countenance. Valentine instinctively raised her eyes as if to thank heaven. "Pray go, Valentine," said Monsieur de Villefort, "and see what this new fancy of your grandfather's is." Valentine rose quickly and was hastening joyfully towards the door when Monsieur de Villefort altered his intentions. "Stop," said he. "I will go with you." "Excuse me, sir," said Franz. "Since Monsieur Noirtier sent for me, I am ready to attend to his wish. Besides, I shall be happy to pay my respects to him, not having yet had the honor of doing so." "Pray, sir," said Villefort with marked uneasiness, "do not disturb yourself." "Forgive me, sir," said Franz in a resolute tone. "I would not lose this opportunity of proving to Monsieur Noirtier how wrong it would be of him to encourage feelings of dislike to me, which I am determined to conquer, whatever they may be, by my devotion." And without listening to Villefort, he arose and followed Valentine, who was running downstairs with the joy of a shipwrecked mariner who finds a rock to cling to. Monsieur de Villefort followed them. Chateau Renaud and Morcerf exchanged a third look of still increasing wonder. All right, and now chapter 75, a signed statement. Noirtier was prepared to receive them, dressed in black and installed in his armchair. When the 3 persons he expected had entered, he looked at the door, which his valet immediately closed. "Listen," whispered Villefort to Valentine, who could not conceal her joy. "If Monsieur Noirtier wishes to communicate anything which would delay your marriage, I forbid you to understand him." Valentine blushed, but did not answer. Villefort approached Noirtier. "Here is Monsieur Franz d'Épinay," said he. You requested to see him. We have all wished for this interview, and I trust it will convince you how ill-formed are your objections to Valentine's marriage." Noirtier answered only by a look which made Villefort's blood run cold. He motioned to Valentine to approach. In a moment, thanks to her habit of conversing with her grandfather, she understood that he asked for a key. Then his eye was fixed on the drawer of a small chest between the windows. She opened the drawer and found a key, and understanding that was what he wanted, again watched his eyes, which turned towards an old secretaire which had been neglected for many years and was supposed to contain nothing but useless documents. "Shall I open the secretaire?" asked Valentine. "Yes," said the old man. "And the drawers?" "Yes." "Those at the side?" "No." "The middle one?" "Yes." Valentine opened it and drew out a bundle of papers. "Is that what you wish for?" asked she. "No." She took successively all the other papers out till the drawer was empty. "But there are no more," said she. Noirtier's eye was fixed on the dictionary. "Yes, I understand, grandfather," said the young girl. She pointed to each letter of the alphabet. At the letter S, the old man stopped her. She opened and found the word secret. "Ah, is there a secret spring?" said Valentine. "Yes," said Noirtier. "And who knows it?" Noirtier looked at the door where the servant had gone out. "Barrois?" said she. "Yes." "Shall I call him?" "Yes." Valentine went to the door and called Barrois. Villefort's impatience during this scene made the perspiration roll from his forehead, and Franz was stupefied. The old servant came. "Barrois," said Valentine, "my grandfather has told me to open that drawer in the secretaire, but there is a secret spring in it, which you know. Will you open it?" Barrois looked at the old man. "Obey," said Noirtier's intelligent eye. Barrois touched a spring, the false bottom sprang out, and they saw a bundle of papers tied with a black string. "Is that what you wish for?" said Barrois. "Yes." "Shall I give these papers to Monsieur de Villefort?" "No." "To Mademoiselle Valentine?" "No." "To Monsieur Franz d'Épinay?" "Yes." Franz, astonished, advanced a step. "To me, sir?" said he. "Yes." Franz took them from Barrois, and casting a glance at the cover, read, "To be given, after my death, to General Durand, who shall bequeath the packet to his son, with an injunction to preserve it as containing an important document." "Well, sir," said Franz, "what do you wish me to do with this paper?" "To preserve it, sealed up as it is, doubtless," said the procureur. "No," replied Noirtier eagerly. "Do you wish him to read it?" said Valentine. "Yes," replied the old man. "You understand, Baron, that my grandfather wishes you to read this paper," said Valentine. "Then let us sit down," said Villefort impatiently, "for it will take some time." "Sit down," said the old man. Villefort took a chair, but Valentine remained standing by her father's side, and Franz before him, holding the mysterious paper in his hand. "Read," said the old man. Franz untied it, and in the midst of the most profound silence read, "Extract of the report of a meeting of the Bonapartist Club in the Rue Saint-Jacques, held February 5th, 1815. Franz stopped. "February 5th, 1815, said he. "It is the day my father was murdered." Valentine and Villefort were dumb. The eye of the old man alone seemed to say clearly, "Go on." "But it was on leaving this club," said he, "my father disappeared." Noirtier's eye continued to say, "Read." He resumed. "The undersigned, Louis-Jacques Beaurepaire, Lieutenant Colonel of Artillery, Etienne Duchampy, General of Brigade, and Claude Lecharpal, Keeper of Woods and Forests, declare that on the 4th of February a letter arrived from the island of Elba, recommending to the kindness and the confidence of the Bonapartist Club General Flavien de Quesnel, who, having served the Emperor from 1804 to 1814, was supposed to be devoted to the interests of the Napoleon dynasty, notwithstanding the title of Baron which Louis XVIII had just granted to him with his estate of Épinay. A note was in consequence addressed to General de Quesnel, begging him to be present at the meeting next day, the 5th. The note indicated neither the street nor the number of the house where the meeting was to be held. It bore no signature, but it announced to the general that someone would call for him, if he would be ready at 9 o'clock. The meetings were always held from that time till midnight. At 9 o'clock, the president of the club presented himself. The general was ready. The president informed him that one of the conditions of his introduction was that he should be eternally ignorant of the place of meeting, and that he would allow his eyes to be bandaged, swearing that he would not endeavor to take off the bandage. General de Quesnel accepted the condition and promised on his honor not to seek to discover the road they took. The general's carriage was ready, but the president told him it was impossible for him to use it, since it was useless to blindfold the master if the coachman knew through what streets he went. "What must be done, then?" asked the general. "I have my carriage here," said the president. "Have you, then, so much confidence in your servant that you can entrust him with a secret you will not allow me to know?" "Our coachman is a member of the club," said the president. "We shall be driven by a state councillor." "Then we run another risk," said the general, laughing, "that of being upset." We insert this joke to prove that the general was not in the least compelled to attend the meeting, but that he came willingly. When they were seated in the carriage, the president reminded the general of his promise to allow his eyes to be bandaged, to which he made no opposition. On the road, the president thought he saw the general make an attempt to remove the handkerchief, and reminded him of his oath. "Sure enough," said the general. The carriage stopped at an alley leading out of the Rue Saint-Jacques. The general alighted, leaning on the arm of the president, of whose dignity he was not aware, considering him simply as a member of the club. They went through the alley, mounted a flight of stairs, and entered the assembly room. The deliberations had already begun. The members, apprised of the sort of presentation which was to be made that evening, were all in attendance. When in the middle of the room the general was invited to remove his bandage, he did so immediately, and was surprised to see so many well-known faces in a society of whose existence he had till then been ignorant. They questioned him as to his sentiments, but he contented himself with answering that the letters from the island of Elba ought to have informed them. Franz interrupted himself by saying, "My father was a royalist. They need not have asked his sentiments, which were well known." "And hence," said Villefort, "arose my affection for your father, my dear Monsieur Franz. Opinions held in common are a ready bond of union." "Read again," said the old man. Franz continued. The president then sought to make him speak more explicitly, but Monsieur de Quesnel replied that he wished first to know what they wanted with him. He was then informed of the contents of the letter from the island of Elba, in which he was recommended to the club as a man who would be likely to advance the interests of their party. One paragraph spoke of the return of Bonaparte, and promised another letter in further details on the arrival of the Pharaon belonging to the shipbuilder Morel of Marseille, whose captain was entirely devoted to the emperor. During all this time, the general, on whom they thought to have relied as on a brother, manifested evidently signs of discontent and repugnance. When the reading was finished, he remained silent with knitted brows. "Well," asked the president, "what do you say to this letter, General?" "I say that it is too soon, after declaring myself for Louis XVIII, to break my vow in behalf of the ex-emperor." This answer was too clear to permit of any mistake as to his sentiments. "General," said the president, "we acknowledge no king Louis XVIII or an ex-emperor, but his majesty, the emperor and king, driven from France, which is his kingdom, by violence and treason." "Excuse me, gentlemen," said the general, "you may not acknowledge Louis XVIII, but I do, as he has made me a baron and a field marshal, and I shall never forget that for these two titles I am indebted to his happy return to France." "Sir," said the president, rising with gravity, "be careful what you say. Your words clearly show us that they are deceived concerning you in the island of Elba, and have deceived us. The communication has been made to you in consequence of the confidence placed in you, and which does you honor. Now we discover our error. A title and promotion attach you to the government we wish to overturn. We will not constrain you to help us. We enroll no one against his conscience, but we will compel you to act generously, even if you are not disposed to do so. You would call acting generously, knowing your conspiracy and not informing against you? That is what I should call becoming your accomplice. You see, I am more candid than you. Ah, my father, said Franz, interrupting himself. I understand now why they murdered him. Valentine could not help casting one glance towards the young man, whose filial enthusiasm it was delightful to behold. Villefort walked to and fro behind them. Noirtier watched the expression of each one and preserved his dignified and commanding attitude. Franz returned to the manuscript and continued, Sir, said the president, you have been invited to join this assembly. You were not forced here. It was proposed to you to come blindfolded. You accepted. When you complied with this twofold request, you well knew we did not wish to secure the throne of Louis XVIII, or we should not take so much care to avoid the vigilance of the police. It would be conceding too much to allow you to put on a mask to aid you in the discovery of our secret, and then to remove it that you may ruin those who have confided in you. No, no. You must first say if you declare yourself for the king of a day who now reigns, or for his majesty, the emperor. I am a royalist, replied the general. I have taken the oath of allegiance to Louis XVIII, and I will adhere to it. These words were followed by a general murmur, and it was evident that several of the members were discussing the propriety of making the general repent of his rashness. The president again arose, and having imposed silence, said, Sir, you are too serious and too sensible a man not to understand the consequences of our present situation, and your candor has already dictated to us the conditions which remain for us to offer you. The general, putting his hand on his sword, exclaimed, If you talk of honor, do not begin by disavowing its laws, and impose nothing by violence. And you, sir, continued the president, with a calmness still more terrible than the general's anger, I advise you not to touch your sword. The general looked around him with slight uneasiness. However, he did not yield, but calling up all his fortitude, said, I will not swear. Then you must die, replied the president calmly. Monsieur d'Épinay became very pale. He looked round him a second time. Several members of the club were whispering and getting their arms from under their cloaks. General, said the president, do not alarm yourself. You are among men of honor who will use every means to convince you before resorting to the last extremity. But as you have said, you are among conspirators, you are in possession of our secret, and you must restore it to us. A significant silence followed these words, and as the general did not reply, Close the doors, said the president to the doorkeeper. The same deadly silence succeeded these words. Then the general advanced, and making a violent effort to control his feelings, I have a son, said he, and I ought to think of him, finding myself among assassins. General, said the chief of the assembly, one man may insult 50. It is the privilege of weakness, but he does wrong to use his privilege. Follow my advice. Swear, and do not insult. The general, again daunted by the superiority of the chief, hesitated a moment. Then advancing to the president's desk, What is the form? Said he. It is this. I swear by my honor not to reveal to anyone what I have seen and heard on the 5th of February, 1815, between 9 and 10 o'clock in the evening, and I plead guilty of death should I ever violate this oath. The general appeared to be affected by a nervous tremor, which prevented his answering for some moments. Then, overcoming his manifest repugnance, he pronounced the required oath, but in so low a tone as to be scarcely audible to the majority of the members, who insisted on his repeating it clearly and distinctly, which he did. Now am I at liberty to retire, said the general. The president arose, appointed 3 members to accompany him, and got into the carriage with the general after bandaging his eyes. One of those 3 members was the coachman who had driven them there. The other members silently dispersed. Where do you wish to be taken? asked the president. Anywhere out of your presence, replied Monsieur d'Épinay. Beware, sir, replied the president. You are no longer in the assembly and have only to do with individuals. Do not insult them unless you wish to be held responsible. But instead of listening, Monsieur d'Épinay went on. You are still as brave in your carriage as in your assembly because you are still 4 against 1. The president stopped the coach. They were at that part of the Quai des Ormes where the steps lead down to the river. Why do you stop here? Asked d'Épinay. Because, sir, said the president, you have insulted a man, and that man will not go 1 step farther without demanding honorable reparation. Another method of assassination, said the general, shrugging his shoulders. Make no noise, sir, unless you wish me to consider you as one of the men of whom you spoke just now as cowards, who take their weakness for a shield. You are alone. One alone shall answer you. You have a sword by your side. I have one in my case. You have no witness. One of these gentlemen will serve you. Now, if you please, remove your bandage. The general tore the handkerchief from his eyes. At last, said he, I shall know with whom I have to do. They opened the door, and the 4 men alighted. Franz again interrupted himself and wiped the cold drops from his brow. There was something awful in hearing the son read aloud in trembling pallor those details of his father's death, which had hitherto been a mystery. Valentine clasped her hands as if in prayer. Noirtier looked at Villefort with an almost sublime expression of contempt and pride. Franz continued, It was, as we said, the 5th of February. For 3 days the mercury had been 5 or 6 degrees below freezing, and the steps were covered with ice. The general was stout and tall. The president offered him the side of the railing to assist him in getting down. The 2 witnesses followed. It was a dark night. The ground from the steps to the river was covered with snow and hoarfrost. The water of the river looked black and deep. One of the seconds went for a lantern in a coal barge near, and by its light they examined the weapons. The president's sword, which was simply, as he had said, one he carried in his cane, was 5 inches shorter than the general's, and had no guard. The general proposed to cast lots for the swords, but the president said it was he who had given the provocation, and when he had given it, he had supposed each would use his own arms. The witnesses endeavored to insist, but the president bade them be silent. The lantern was placed on the ground. The 2 adversaries took their stations, and the duel began. The light made the 2 swords appear like flashes of lightning. As for the men, they were scarcely perceptible, the darkness was so great. General d'Épinay passed for one of the best swordsmen in the army, but he was pressed so closely in the onset that he missed his aim and fell. The witnesses thought he was dead, but his adversary, who knew he had not struck him, offered him the assistance of his hand to rise. The circumstance irritated instead of calming the general, and he rushed on his adversary. But his opponent did not allow his guard to be broken. He received him on his sword, and 3 times the general drew back on finding himself too closely engaged, and then returned to the charge. At the 3rd he fell again. They thought he slipped as at first, and the witnesses, seeing he did not move, approached and endeavored to raise him. But the one who passed his arm around the body found it was moistened with blood. The general, who had almost fainted, revived. Ah, said he, they have sent some fencing master to fight with me. The president, without answering, approached the witness who held the lantern, and raising his sleeve, showed him 2 wounds he had received in his arm. Then, opening his coat and unbuttoning his waistcoat, displayed his side, pierced with a 3rd wound. Still, he had not even uttered a sigh. General d'Épinay died 5 minutes after. Franz read these last words in a voice so choked that they were hardly audible, and then stopped, passing his hand over his eyes as if to dispel a cloud. But after a moment's silence, he continued. The president went up the steps after pushing his sword into his cane. A track of blood on the snow marked his course. He had scarcely arrived at the top when he heard a heavy splash in the water. It was the general's body, which the witnesses had just thrown into the river after ascertaining that he was dead. The general fell then in a loyal duel, and not in ambush as it might have been reported. In proof of this, we have signed this paper to establish the truth of the facts, lest the moment should arrive when either of the actors in this terrible scene should be accused of premeditated murder or of infringement of the laws of honor. Signed, Beaurepaire, Duchampy, and Le Charpal. When Franz had finished reading this account, so dreadful for a son, when Valentine, pale with emotion, had wiped away a tear, when Villefort, trembling and crouched in a corner, had endeavored to lessen the storm by supplicating glances at the implacable old man, "Sir," said d'Épinay to Noirtier, "since you are well acquainted with all these details, which are attested by honorable signatures, since you appear to take some interest in me, although you have only manifested it hitherto by causing me sorrow, refuse me not one final satisfaction. Tell me the name of the president of the club, that I may at least know who killed my father." Villefort mechanically felt for the handle of the door. Valentine, who understood sooner than anyone her grandfather's answer, and who had often seen 2 scars upon his right arm, drew back a few steps. "Mademoiselle," said Franz, turning towards Valentine, "unite your efforts with mine to find out the name of the man who made me an orphan at 2 years of age." Valentine remained dumb and motionless. "Hold, sir," said Villefort. "Do not prolong this dreadful scene. The names have been purposely concealed. My father himself does not know who this president was, and if he knows, he cannot tell you. Proper names are not in the dictionary." "Oh, misery!" cried Franz. "The only hope which sustained me and enabled me to read to the end was that of knowing, at least, the name of him who killed my father. Sir, sir," cried he, turning to Noirtier, "do what you can. Make me understand in some way." "Yes," replied Noirtier. "Oh, mademoiselle, mademoiselle," cried Franz, "your grandfather says he can indicate the person. Help me. Lend me your assistance." Noirtier looked at the dictionary. Franz took it with a nervous trembling and repeated the letters of the alphabet successively until he came to M. At that letter, the old man signified yes. "M," repeated Franz. The young man's finger glided over the words, but at each one Noirtier answered by a negative sign. Valentine hid her head between her hands. At length, Franz arrived at the word myself. "Yes." "You," cried Franz, whose hair stood on end. "You, Monsieur Noirtier. You killed my father?" "Yes," replied Noirtier, fixing a majestic look on the young man. Franz fell powerless on a chair. Villefort opened the door and escaped, for the idea had entered his mind. Villefort entered the door and escaped, for the idea had entered his mind to stifle the little remaining life in the heart of this terrible old man. That concludes chapters 74 and 75 of the Count of Monte Cristo. Baron d'Épinay has learned who murdered his father, General Quesnel, so long ago, just before the return of Napoleon to France. And Monsieur Noirtier has done his best, as he promised Maximilian and Valentine he would do, to stop the marriage of his granddaughter to the Baron Franz d'Épinay. So, and of course, I love that last line where Monsieur de Villefort is leaving the room trying to stifle his urge to murder his father for being so obstinate. Okay. Thank you very much for joining me today. It was a fabulous day of reading. I hope you enjoyed it at least half as much as I did. That was a great chapter for me. I love seeing it come around where Monsieur de Noirtier, whom everyone thinks is powerless, is able to express himself and to still have a hand in deciding what will happen, and to show that he is still a man of influence in the family. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you tomorrow for more revelations in The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.